There's a mentality among video game players, critics, and developers alike that games that have tons of features and gameplay modes and huge areas are automatically better than smaller, more focused titles simply due to their massive scale. Open world, bigger is better, more is more. Or is it? My name is Calvin, and this is Ludus Lounge. Chances are, if you're interested in video games, you've probably gotten some ideas for games you'd like to make yourself. And when your creative juices start flowing, you experience an avalanche of ideas for things you'd like to put in them. But if you're starting from a point of little knowledge or experience, what you may not know is that the best thing to do is to actually halt that flow and bring your ideas in one at a time, because you will surely find that this cavalcade of creativity is actually harmful to the final product. This is a phenomenon affectionately referred to as feature creep. For those of you who don't know, feature creep is what happens when software developers want to add more things to do into their programs just because they had the idea and it seemed good. This is dangerous when it comes to software, like video games, because it adds unnecessary time to the development cycle and it raises the cost of a project while there might not be funding available. But there's another aspect to feature creep which I have noticed in certain franchises, which is when developers add extraneous functionality to a series over multiple entries, effectively breaking the game's world. I'm going to call this tendency feature sneak, partly because I first noticed it when recently playing the Sly Cooper trilogy, and I thought it would be a clever phrase to associate it with a series that focuses on stealth, but also because sometimes these new systems get snuck in without being announced or asked for. They just get put in because developers and publishers feel they need to constantly build and grow their series in order to put more check marks on the back of the game's box. The changes made to the Sly Cooper series really bothered me as they made the game complicated and unwieldy, and the later entries wound up straying too far from the spirit of the developer's original vision. Let me give you some examples of what I'm talking about. But rather than complaining about Sly Cooper's problems the whole time, I'm going to bring in another series which I believe is a good example of how feature sneak can work well. The other series I will be using for reference is Ratchet and Clank, because it shares a lot of the same DNA that Sly has, being a cartoony action platformer published by Sony Computer Entertainment from the same era. Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus is a great 3D platformer. Its levels are designed with a cohesive flow, and Sly's moveset fits perfectly with them. When you move through this space, you feel like you belong there because you gradually earn a full stable of acrobatic moves which allow you to reach places that no other character can. And the gameplay gets shaken up every once in a while with a different gameplay mode, and sometimes you don't even play as Sly. But when you control each of the other characters, you're doing something that that character specializes in because they have certain skills that none of the others possess. It makes sense in context. Similarly, Ratchet and Clank is a great 3D platformer with some brief sections of different game modes, and occasionally you get to play as someone other than the main character because you need someone else's specialty for certain parts. But apart from some variations on the themes, it pretty much fits the description that I just gave about Sly Cooper. Sucker Punch and Insomniac both use the same basic ingredients to craft their own unique games that feel distinct from each other despite their connective tissue. But let's take a look at what changed in the transition to Game 2 in each series. Instead of building upon their strengths and developing the systems they had created for Sly 1, Sucker Punch introduced a totally new set of features for the follow-up. For one thing, the carefully crafted levels were pushed to the side in favor of a more open-world environment. Now, this may have been the result of Sucker Punch and Sony trying to ride the cash-lined coattails of the newly revamped Grand Theft Auto series, which proved that open-world games could be extremely lucrative, but traversing through the environments neither felt as fun as it does in GTA, nor as smooth and slinky as it did in Sly 1. Perhaps the reason for this is that the environments had to be designed to allow for Murray and Bentley to make their way across them easily, as at this point they were fully playable characters who could free roam around the world. But these are also characters who have no business being out there in the first place. Murray is the driver, and he's very timid. In the first game, he needed to be escorted by Sly while heading to certain points because he couldn't protect himself. And Bentley is a computer geek. In Sly 1, he never even left the van because he was so ill-equipped to go up against the bad guys. Having characters in environments they don't belong in might not seem like a big deal at first glance. After all, video game logic dances to the beat of its own drum. There are countless video games that have characters in situations that don't hold up well under scrutiny, yet we make allowances for them because video games are fun. But the problems with the transition from Sly 1 to Sly 2 went beyond merely not making sense into the realm of breaking the context of the game world. If Murray and Bentley could run across the rooftops as well as Sly could, then why even have Sly as part of the team? His specialty was made redundant, and I began to question whether Sly himself was as thievious as he was cracked up to be. By contrast, with Ratchet and Clank going commando, Insomniac did not feel the need to explode the feature set by changing the characters' specialties and totally revamping the environment. Instead, they gave us new weapons and gadgets to cause chaos with, and new space combat sections to give some variety to Ratchet's actions. These levels add even more gameplay variety without detracting from the experience, because they make sense in context. We've already seen in loading screens that Ratchet knows how to fly, so it's not a huge leap of logic to assume that he can handle himself well in a dogfight. And when it came to the dynamic between Ratchet and Clank, because none of their skills cross over between each other, there was no reason to change their abilities so drastically as Sucker Punch did with Sly and his gang. Playing as Clank always made sense within the context of his character, because between the first two games he was doing the things you would expect Clank to do. He is the one who allows Ratchet to pull off all of his platforming stunts, so it makes sense that he would have his own platforming sections. And similarly, Ratchet would not be able to interface with other droids and give them directives the same way Clank can, just like how Sly would not be able to hack a computer the same way Bentley can. The difference is that Clank was never given the duty of running around by himself in the world that Ratchet knew best and facing off against the same enemies. Each character stuck to their specialty and they stayed along the same path for the sequel. And perhaps the most significant, yet also the subtlest addition, came in the form of a change to the game's health system by giving the player experience for every enemy killed, which allowed them to increase their health more than in the previous game and to upgrade their weapons, which had never before been possible. This is the type of addition that enhances the gameplay rather than completely turning it on its head and transforming it into a different game. But when it came to the third entry in each series, Sly really went off the rails for this one. If being able to play as Murray and Bentley in Sly 2 made me suspicious that Sly didn't actually have special talents, then the vast ensemble of playable characters in Sly 3 removed all doubt. Not only were Sly's abilities called into question, but the whole Cooper gang itself was now undergoing a performance review. Why are all these new characters here suddenly? More to the point, how does their involvement help the game? We already have a brawny tough guy, a tech wizard, and a stealth operator, so by introducing these new characters, all the developers have done is reinforce the idea that the Cooper gang is not actually good at what they do, which gives them no reason to have a series of stories made about them. Having Sly forge uneasy alliances with his old foes is interesting from a narrative standpoint, but it feels like they were just shoved in to pad the roster. And why all the extra gameplay modes? Since when does the skill set of a suave, debonair thief involve being an ace combat pilot or commanding a battleship in naval warfare? Also, the new conversation system could have worked, but for two problems. First, Sly was not the only character who could do it, so there goes the idea that he was the only one who could smooth talk his way out of a jam. And second, I eventually discovered that it didn't matter what choices I made, because the dialogue trees always led to the same point, and there were no consequences for picking the wrong option. These modes and characters came from absolutely out of nowhere and only convoluted the game. And what were the major changes made to Ratchet and Clank in Up Your Arsenal? Refined movement and better control over aiming your weapons for starters, plus an improved experience and leveling system for your health and weapons, and the ability to purchase armor for facing off against the more diverse and challenging enemies. Oh, and also a neat little diversion involving Captain Quark in a simple but fun series of side-scrolling minigames. Somewhere down the line, Sucker Punch seems to have forgotten the very essence of what made their characters and games special.
He's charismatic, suave, debonair,
cool, slick, fast, stealthy, athletic, just a daredevil.
Sly Cooper is charming thievery.
Insomniac, on the other hand, never lost control of their original vision and managed to introduce new systems and enhancements to each entry of Ratchet and Clank without compromising the spirit of the series, which of course was...
It's really just about blowing shit up.
Blow up a lot of shit.
Blow up.
Blowing shit up.
Ratchet and Clank.
I don't mean to single out the Sly series. They're good games, they just happen to be the most recent ones I played with this problem. But then I thought about other series and the other ways feature sneak manifests itself. Remember the clunky tower defense mode in Assassin's Creed Revelation? It was so out of place in the game that other than the first mission, you didn't have to do any of it. Or how about the ever-expanding worlds of Rocksteady's Batman series? What made Arkham Asylum so great was that cramped feeling you got from being cloistered in the asylum and having to use Batman's stealth and ninja skills in such a confined space. So why did they think it would have been a good idea to have Batman tearing through Gotham in the Batmobile, firing missiles and crashing all over the place? By the way, Mark Brown over at Game Maker's Toolkit has a great video about how the Arkham series lost its way with each expansion of the game's world. You should check it out.
Victims of an open world is story. A strong narrative can quickly lose its structure and focus when players are given so many distractions.
When you get an idea for a game, it is a difficult but necessary thing to curtail your stream of consciousness and not let your project become bloated by features. But we must never forget that our sequels are likewise vulnerable to such hindrances. There's nothing wrong with wanting to expand upon your games. In fact, it is necessary for the variety and diversity of the art form. But we must always stay true to the essences of the worlds we create, because that, rather than the number of check marks on the back of the box, is what makes them special. Thank you for joining me, and remember, never stop playing. I want to give a big, huge thanks to Mark Brown for letting me use some footage from his Batman episode, and I want to remind you guys to check out his channel at Game Maker's Toolkit. He's got a lot of great stuff to say, he's got some terrific videos, he definitely knows what he's talking about. And also make sure you subscribe to Ludus Press and click that big old thumbs up button there, and make sure you stay tuned for a new episode of Ludus Lounge every third Saturday of the month. Take care, bye-bye.